Democracy is in peril, and Senator Raphael Warnock is sounding the alarm. And he isn't just a United States Senator. He is also the pastor at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Georgia, the same church that Martin Luther King Jr. preached from. Today, he joins us to expose Donald Trump's plan to disenfranchise voters and to explain why moral leadership matters more now than ever before. But first, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel to stay informed about how you can defend democracy. Senator Raphael Warnock, welcome to Defending Democracy.
Great to be with you, Mark.
So I really needed to talk to you. There is so much going on in the world right now that so many people are worried about. Democracy feels like it is under attack in our in our city streets, in the halls of Congress where you are, frankly, in our neighborhoods. The White House seems to have no respect for the rule of law. Before I turn to your current role, it is rare that I get the chance to talk to someone who had a more impactful and more successful career before they came to the U.S. Senate than when they came to the U.S. Senate. But you are the senior pastor at the Ebenezer Baptist Church, which, for people who don't know, this is the most historic church in America. This is where Martin Luther King Jr. Preached, and it has just an absolutely, historic and unmatched place in American history around issues of democracy, around issues of justice. So I don't know if I'm asking you to put on which hat to put it on, but how do you make sense of this moment in the struggle? I'll be honest. I have confessed I doubt that the arc of the moral universe is long but bends towards justice. I believe it is long. But what do you say to people like me who maybe are losing faith that it is bending towards justice?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's always good to chat with you. You rightly point out that these are dark days, difficult times. And as I move around the state of Georgia and talk to my own parishioners, move across the country, uh, there is a kind of foreboding, a sense of despair. And what I want to say at the outset that is actually part of the work
Hmm.
that the administration is doing, and we have to be really clear about that. They are doing all of the things that we can see and we can lay out in terms of public policy, an all-out assault on our democracy, and that matters. I often say that democracy is the political enactment of a spiritual idea. Uh, this notion that each of us has within ourselves a spark of the divine, if you are not given to that kind of theistic language, that we have value, and if we have value, we ought to have a voice, and what that looks like is a vote. And so they're attacking that, which I think is ultimately a moral issue, a spiritual issue, as well as a political issue. They have literally robbed millions of Americans of their health care,
Hmm.
not just the folks who are on Medicaid, but ordinary hardworking families who, in just a few weeks from now, are going to get their newest bill for their health care, and they're going to see, from in some instances, that it has doubled.
Hmm.
All to give billionaires a tax cut. But on top of all of this, part of the despair is part of the political work that they're doing. They are trying to convince us, as authoritarian wannabes do, that they have already won. This flooding the zone is part of the work. So many balls going, you don't know which ones to swing at. And they're trying to convince us that they've already won. And when you are convinced of that, then you cower in fear. You're afraid, and fear is a big part of the work we're seeing that. Anytime you're literally talking powerful law firms, thankfully not yours, into submission. And what we have to do is straighten our backs. Dr. King, who led the church that I'm honored to pastor even to this day, said that no one can ride your back unless it is bent.
Hmm.
And so we have to straighten up our backs and know that we are not the first ones who've had to fight against overwhelming odds, to hope against hope, and to trust in what I believe is the American creed. It's in the first three words of the Constitution: we the people. And I believe that it's not ultimately, it's not easy. Ultimately, it's not about the people in power. It's about the power that's in the people. Straighten our backs and use it.
So maybe you can, before we turn to the business of the Senate, say a word about, given your background and your longstanding commitment to democracy and your role uh, at Ebenezer Baptist. Um, I think that it is oftentimes for people today, they read about the civil rights era and they read around about the Jim Crow South, and it goes something like this. There was a bad period, and then good thing happened, good thing happened, good thing happened. The Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and it was like, and that there was never a moment of setback or despair, right? It's like in the rear view mirror, there's like John Lewis a hero and this person a hero, and that's not to minimize any of that, by the way. Of course, John Lewis was a tremendous hero, but I think probably at the time it felt maybe more hopeless or more fearful than it now in retrospect feels more inevitable.
You're making such an important point, Mark, and I appreciate it. As the pastor of the church and a lifelong student of the movement, I was born a year after Dr. King's death, and from childhood, I was just enamored with his voice and how he used it for good in the world. But you're right, we tell ourselves a very simple story about the civil rights movement. We Americans tell ourselves a very simple story about American history, period.
We do.
But this idea that there was, oppression and discrimination, and then Martin Luther King Jr. gave a speech on the mall. He said, "I have a dream." Everybody agreed, and then we passed these laws. Listen, at one point during his lifetime, he was one of the most hated men in America. Think about that. This apostle of love and nonviolence, deeply hated. The polling showed that that white America thought he was asking for too much, way too soon, and was moving too fast, and that he was actually, imagine this, that he was actually a stumbling block to progress. Maybe if you don't push so hard. So the backlash that we have been seeing over the last 8 months after this president ironically was inaugurated on the Dr. King holiday,
Right.
the backlash that we have been seeing, I think, in almost immediately after the election of Barack Obama, we have been wrestling with that now really for the last 50 years. And it started actually during Dr. King's life. And it is that tension in the American soul. I put it this way as a pastor: all families have a complicated story. And that story is always more complicated than the story we tell ourselves at the family reunion. There are ghosts in the attic, in the basement of every family, and there's a way in which we all know the truth, but it becomes uncomfortable to speak those truths, which is what this erasure of books and history is all about. But I have been blessed because I was John Lewis's pastor, and the night before I presided over his funeral, I asked myself, what was John Lewis thinking, 25 years old, when he was crossing that Edmund Pettus Bridge with brute force on the other side of that bridge? Was he thinking that at the end of his life, the whole country would be watching his funeral and that there would be three American presidents on both sides of the aisle there? No, he couldn't imagine that. Was he thinking that he'd be the recipient of a Presidential Medal of Freedom? Clearly, that's not why he did it. He could not have imagined that. I think John Lewis really was just, he and Hosea Williams, who crossed that bridge with him, I think they were just trying to stay alive that day. They were trying to stay alive that day so that they could fight the next. But by some act of grace mingled with human resilience and determination, he didn't just cross a bridge, he built the bridge in the process. And I was able to cross that bridge decades later to become the first Black senator, John Ossoff, the first Jewish senator, from the state of Georgia. And we keep doing that work. You rightly point out that art doesn't just bend toward justice. We have to keep bending it. And it takes a lot of work. And there are days when it pushes back. There are moments when in our country's history when the democracy expands, there are moments when it contracts. And we're going through one big contraction right now. But everybody who's ever had a baby, and I've witnessed that miracle, watching my own children come into the world, as painful as contractions are, as deep as the travail is, easy for me to say, I'm a man. Contractions lead to new birth. And I think that we have to midwife, if you will, that promise and that possibility in what is also an American moment, this very moment.
So I've never asked you this question. I've known you for a long time. I was a fan of you being a U.S. senator probably before you were a fan of you being a U.S. senator, as you recall.
It took some convincing.
It took some convincing, and I was dogged over the course of years to get you the Senate. Before I ask you about being a senator, you also have another part of your background that is not talked about that often. But as someone who is born and raised in New York, you have a historic connection to actually what those of us who grew up in New York thought was perhaps the most important and historic Black church in America. And talk a little bit about that, and also a church that also had its own proud history of political and social justice engagement. And talk a little bit about that, and also how they differed. Like, how does New York City differ from Atlanta, Georgia, in terms of the way people think about democracy and the way people think about the connection between social justice and democracy?
Yeah. No, thank you. I look, I'm a Georgia boy. I was born and raised in Georgia, but I went to seminary in New York City.
Right.
I attended Union Theological Seminary, which, by the way, is across the street from Jewish Theological
That's
Seminary
right.
and Columbia University. And so it was a wonderful, heady time for a 22-year-old from Georgia to be to find himself in New York. And while there, I served almost the entire time while in seminary. The entire time I served at Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem. Abyssinian was the church led by Reverend Congressman
Right.
Adam Clayton Powell Jr. And so he was the pastor of that church in the middle of the 20th century. By the way, it's the oldest Black Baptist church in the state of New York, founded when Thomas Jefferson was president, 1808, by a group of Ethiopian merchants and some African Americans. And Adam Clayton Powell Jr., he had pastored that church, way before my time in a different era. But his contemporaries were still there. They were the old timers in the church. And they would often regale me with stories about Adam Powell's effectiveness as a legislator and how he translated what he preached on Sunday into legislation Monday through Friday, having been a very successful legislator.
Yes. Really a fixture of New York, growing up in New York, obviously well after he was gone. I mean, he was a legendary political figure in the state of New York.
Indeed. And I don't know, as I look back on my journey, I told you King was the person I was most enamored by early on, but that I was also shaped by my 10 years that I served at Abyssinian Church. And it was led at the time, I should say, by Calvin Butts, who was an activist preacher in his own right, took on the tobacco companies as they seemed to be really focused on poor and marginalized communities with their advertising, and took on a whole range of issues. He was a living example for me of what it means to take your ministry to the streets. The first time I got arrested in an act of civil disobedience, and that I've done a few times. First time that happened, I was a young assistant minister at Abyssinian Baptist Church. There was an African immigrant, a student, and why it shouldn't matter, a very intelligent man, spoke multiple languages. His name was Amadou Diallo, you may remember.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
And while standing on his own porch, reaching, I think, for his wallet or whatever, his keys, trying to go into his own house, He was shot, I think, about some 39 times by an elite uh, police unit of the NYPD. It was a time when we were seeing a real problem with police brutality, and it shocked the conscience of the city. And it was the first time I, as a young pastor, seminary student, um, informed in many ways by not only the witness of Martin Luther King Jr., but Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German theologian and pastor who I've long admired, um, decided that it was time to put my body in the struggle. And along with throngs of other New Yorkers, I got arrested in an act of civil disobedience, challenging law enforcement to do better, even as we respect the work that they do. And ever since then, I've been trying to put my body on the line to do the work, which I'm honored to do on behalf of the people of Georgia and on behalf of a country that I believe is already great. And we just need to lean into our greatness, which only happens when we recognize that we are all we've got, each other.
And you do that every day in the Senate. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that. And let me start with this. Um, what the Republicans did in this bill that they passed to target people who need health care. I mean, everyone needs health care, but people who need health care probably more than any other population. The Medicaid, the cuts they made to Medicaid, which, just hurt the poor, the working class, the middle class in some places. And to do that, as I understand it, but you're the expert in this, almost for a dollar basis to give tax breaks to the richest people. Um, what like whether it is morally or politically, what were they doing? Like what on earth were they thinking? What were they saying they were doing? I'll be right back with more of my conversation with Senator Raphael Warnock in a moment. But in 2020, I founded Democracy Docket to be the go-to resource for democracy and voting rights and everything you need to know about what's happening in court. And now, as we face a pivotal moment in that fight for democracy, that mission is more important than ever before. And that is why the Democracy Docket team is growing, but it needs your help to hold Donald Trump and the Republicans accountable. For just $10 a month, you can get access to exclusive content, insights from me, events, and more. Become a premium member now in the description below, and you will help make democracy flourish.
Well, I mean, you heard all the rhetoric, and I'll let
Yeah,
them make their own case, but
yeah,
it's deeply short-sighted. But not only is it short-sighted, it's cruel.
right.
Let's just call it what it is. It's cruel. Um, Dr. King said that of all the injustices, inequality in healthcare is the most shocking and the most inhumane. Um, we are a great nation, and we certainly can afford to ensure that our citizens have just basic health care. And we haven't reached that goal with all the things we've done with the Affordable Care Act and all. These are approximations of what we really could do if we decided to do it. And that we haven't done it does not reflect a poverty of resources, but a poverty of moral imagination, a displacement of values and priorities. And you saw it clearly in this bill. Mark, they could have not done any of those cuts in Medicaid if they had simply allowed the tax cuts, the Trump tax cuts, to expire for the wealthiest Americans. Think about that. The thing that I think that happens often in this conversation about taxes and all of this, and because they play the okey doke on people, most of your listeners, let me be clear. We're not talking about you. You know what I'm saying? Oh, we want you to have more. Listen, if you're listening to me, chances are I'm not talking about you.
Right.
Most of us don't have that high class problem. If they had allowed the tax cuts, if they had allowed those tax cuts to expire, the Trump tax cuts of 2017, think about that. For the wealthiest Americans, they wouldn't have had to do these deep Medicaid cuts. So what they sold was a bill of goods. The unprecedented tax cuts for billionaires, for huge corporations, while literally cutting millions of dollars out of Medicaid. But not only the folks, I was in a rural hospital a few weeks ago. I went to the Evans Memorial Hospital in Claxton. This is an example of rural hospitals we see all over the country. And ironically, a lot of the people who voted for Trump, they're the ones that are going to hurt in
I
these
was going to ask you this. Isn't this,
rural
aren't,
communities.
aren't a lot of the people on Medicaid and suffering from this in red
Rural,
areas?
rural communities are disproportionately represented in their need for Medicaid. You running a rural hospital, you're on the edge. That hospital that I visited a few weeks ago is going to have to cut $3.3 million out of its annual budget. Now, let's face it, for folks who live in the big city, that doesn't really sound like a lot of money. But a small rural community like the one I was in, that is a huge part of their budget. These are hospitals where I was talking to the administrator there. He was saying that just, there are like 3 or 4 hospitals in that region, in that broad region outside of, and none of them have a labor and delivery unit.
Mm.
Think about that. Here is the thing, and so they may have to do some other cuts. So here's the thing. Even if you have resources, think you live in that community, even if you have resources, even if you have insurance, let's say you're having a stroke. We've lost a dozen hospitals in Georgia over the last several years. So you're having a stroke, you've got insurance, you might be a millionaire. If you can't get to the hospital in time, the damage with the stroke is all about timing. It's all about getting to the doctor in time, and you're every bit as imperiled in that moment. We're tied in a single garment of destiny, caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality. Dr. King told us, whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. It is in my enlightened self-interest to ensure that my neighbor has basic health care and a path to prosperity.
Do you think your Republican counterparts in the Senate, do you think they know what they're doing here? Like, do you think, I've asked this of a number of your Senate colleagues. I've asked this of a number of Democratic House members because I am fascinated by this. There's like a couple of possibilities. Number one, they really believe what they're doing is right. Number two, they know what they're doing is wrong, but they are afraid of Donald Trump. Number three, they are someplace in between. They kind of like justify that maybe they're doing some stuff that's not great, but they think they're doing other what is the, do you have any sense for whether they are morally oblivious to what they're doing or whether they know it?
It's an age-old question, isn't it? Because,
It is.
I think about this looking at it through the lens of a person of faith. Religious people, particularly Christians in our country, sadly, and I say this as a Christian, I preach the gospel every Sunday, right? But Christians have often been on the wrong side of, you name the issue, on the wrong side of slavery. Slavery couldn't have lasted as long as it did without the church. On the wrong side of segregation, on the wrong side of just recognizing the basic human dignity of members of the LGBTQ community, on the wrong side, and some of the meanest voices towards poor people right now. I don't know what gospel they're reading, that they're more angry at poor people than they are about poverty. So I don't know. I think people tell themselves a range of stories, especially politicians, tell themselves a range of stories about why they voted the way they voted, did the thing that they wanted to do, and I'm sure there's a story that they tell themselves. I think in some ways, and it may seem a strange thing, I'm interested in that as a pastor, but as someone who wants the country to just do better, and who in one sense, I don't care what motivates people sometimes to do the right thing. If I can get them to get to a good place that's going to save lives, I don't care. I think part of it, and part of what we're dealing with, and you're in this fight every single day, something like partisan and racial gerrymandering.
Yeah.
that is about politicians trying to protect their short-term electoral interests.
Yeah.
But what the other side has done, and they have been quite good at it, but what they've done is they've sewn themselves up in a bag that's so narrow that it forces them to the edges,
Yeah. And
right?
and we see that in voting,
It's
right?
a trap.
Yeah.
It's a trap, not just for the country. It's a problem, not just for Democrats. It's a trap that Republicans have pushed themselves in. And I guess once you're there, maybe you convince yourself that you like being there. But remember all the difficulty they had just trying to come to agreement about who would be the speaker.
Yeah.
And then you went from one speaker to the, and folks were watching this for the kind of the Human People magazine drama. But what got lost in that conversation is, well, how did we end up here? Because you got a small group of fringe folks who are pushing you there. Well, how did they end up in Congress? Partisan and racial gerrymandering. And so this is why I work so hard. It's why we got to pass the Freedom to Vote Act. It's why we got to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. I think that there is a way in which they won't recognize it. We're trying to liberate the Republicans from themselves and create the conditions in which in our country we can have reasonable, sane conversations. I don't focus on these extreme members so much. And we've got, there's a couple of folks in my own Georgia delegation.
Oh, I think we could guess who.
I won't.
You don't have to name names. It's okay.
Yeah, I never talk about her because I think if it weren't her, it'd be somebody else because of the gerrymandering.
Right.
So we have to fix these systemic problems that lead to these bigger sins that we're witnessing that literally rob people of health care.
Yeah. So I want to talk to you about the voting issues. I've been proud, my law firm and I, we struck down the map drawn in Alabama because it discriminated against Black voters. That's not my opinion. That's the opinion of a 3-judge federal panel, including 2 Donald Trump appointees, and that the Supreme Court upheld. As a result, Black voters in Alabama had the opportunity in 2024 to go to the polls and elect 2 rather than 1 candidates of choice. Now, that is a right that is guaranteed to them under federal law. So the fact that they had to suffer the indignity of not having that right in place is a grave injustice. We did the same thing in Louisiana. We sued Louisiana and same results. They had to draw a new map. I've sued your state of Georgia, frankly, and that case is now in the Court of Appeals, where the Republican Party in Georgia is now trying to strike down the Voting Rights Act. The Republicans in Alabama are trying to strike down the Voting Rights Act. The Republicans in Louisiana are trying to strike down the Voting Rights Act. We are suing Texas. I was suing Texas for racial gerrymandering against Black voters and Latino voters under the old map, the map that everyone now is like lauding that we need to go back to. And so this has become an epidemic within the Republican Party in a way that I think would not have been politically acceptable to Republicans even 10 years ago. It is almost to watch what happened in Alabama, where we won, and then to watch the state of Alabama say, we are not going to follow the court's order. We'd rather defy a court's order than comply with the Voting Rights Act.
Which Roberts famously said in 2013, there's no way they do that again, that they would challenge.
Yeah. And so, tell me if I'm wrong, but it feels to me like we are actually, it's interesting you say it's a trap for them. So maybe I'll take I'll take that framing. It feels like they are setting that trap more aggressively and more boldly than they would have been willing to set it, 10 years ago. It feels sometimes like I'm listening to the rhetoric of frankly, of 1964, of 1963.
I agree with that assessment. I think the thing is circular. You create these systemic problems. You've got to have rhetoric that matches it, and then you become more and more extreme. And all of this right now is in service to an authoritarian project, and so it's urgent. It could not. This is a 5-alarm fire. The democracy itself is very much imperiled. And so we have to continue to fight. We have to fight in the courts. I'm glad to see the ways in which the courts are helping us. Sometimes they're not helpful. It was the Supreme Court that landed us in this situation with uh, the Holder
The Shelby
case,
County,
Shelby
Shelby
versus
County.
Holder. And you know, Ginsburg at that case, her words proved to be prophetic. She said to strike down voter protections right now is like getting rid of your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. And we've seen in the years since then that it's been even more devastating than she predicted. Um, I think that Democrats have got to fight. We've got to fight smart. We've got to win elections. And when we win, I think we need to be very vigilant about what it takes to save our democracy.
Yeah, and I always say that I got into this work for reasons that have to do with who my clients were and what was going on, but I accelerated my interest in voting rights specifically. I became very inspired by Reverend Barber and the Moral Monday movement in North Carolina. I've said this publicly before. I never said it before to a pastor, to another pastor, but he's actually the person who inspired the way I approach voting rights and the way I approach the fight for democracy. For people who don't know, he led a very, very profoundly influential movement in North Carolina.
Towering figure. Towering figure.
Yeah. And at the same time that he was doing that in North Carolina, you and Stacey Abrams and others were mounting sort of a similar effort in Georgia. And what strikes me is that by the time we get to your latest election, you and I are still fighting in court. We're still fighting in court over whether
over the runoff.
Yeah, whether the state of Georgia could disenfranchise tens of thousands of voters by closing the polls on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Okay. Literally, I mean, for the audience out there who thinks that there's some like hidden thing here, oh no, Mark, you and the senator must have been trying to, no, that's it. Like that was the whole thing. It was whether or not the polls, the early voting would be open on that day, which was the only day available for many young voters to vote. And
yeah, I remember it very well. And for folks who would say that, let me lay it out. I had won. I think that's important context. I had won the year before in the special election, and I won in the runoff. And I think that the Republicans examined my victory with surgical precision, if you will. Mm-hmm. And we came back, they passed SB 202.
Yep.
They cut the period of the runoff. They made it harder for people to vote. And then as we were getting ready to go into the runoff, the Secretary of State announced, oh, by the way, you're not going to be able to vote this Saturday after Thanksgiving. And there's this law on the books. It has to do with Thanksgiving and Robert E. Lee's birthday, which is the other.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
You can't make this stuff up. It's so ridiculous. And he basically said our hands are tied, that it was basically a legal-ish problem. And to suggest that he would do differently if he could, he said our hands are tied is what Brian Raffensperger said. And so you took them to court on behalf of my campaign and on behalf of the party to untie their hands. And ironically, after the court ruled in our favor, the folks who said that their hands were tied then showed their hands because they appealed the decision. He could have just accepted the decision if he was being forthright and honest. Well, my hands are tied. You untied his hands. He then appealed the decision, and then we won. And then they appealed again, asking for emergency relief. And I asked myself, what do you want emergency relief from? People voting? People voting? And I won that election by about 96,000 votes. Listen, the weekend that we had to take them to court so people could vote, about 90,000 people voted.
Yeah.
But here is the thing, as I close, as we say on Sunday morning, and our parishioners don't believe us because there are usually 3 or 4 more closes from a Baptist preacher. this is how voter suppression works. It's just a little bit of carving here and a little bit there. It's not, it's on the margins. And that's why these things matter. And I want to thank you publicly, Mark Elias, for your fight and your work. And it's good to be in the struggle with you.
Well, and I want to thank you. If you can give the audience 10 seconds of what why they should be hopeful.
Oh, we've had tough times before, and I still do believe that there's something about the American spirit that is resilient, and we've got to tap into that with all of its diverse representations and win the day.
Reverend Raphael Warnock, Senator Raphael Warnock, you are truly one of the great people in politics for all the right reasons. And there are millions, tens of millions, and hundreds of millions of people who you are fighting for the right reasons to do the right thing. And they and I are grateful. So thank you for joining.